Good late Tuesday, early Wednesday meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving you a look at those temperatures across the region. You do see some 60s here on the board. That's nice to see here. You know, it is a pattern here where we're seeing some quarter try to get, and it's been kind of rainy though. So we're just going to have to, you know, kind of deal with that a little bit longer in our coastal areas here. But things are going to start to improve. There's a coastal flood advisory still because of the way the wind pattern is. We've had these high tides here, just some different things coming into play, causing all of that. But things have started to improve, so that's some good news. You know, that general thunderstorm risk in our southern counties, but you see like Bradford, really not expecting thunderstorms. Duval, not expecting them. It's really that area from St. Augustine and Melrose, give or take, down toward like Micanopy and Cedar Key or so southward. So you kind of get the idea as we're looking and as we're tracking things of that thunderstorm risk. I guess you could say like Horseshoe Beach, but you get the idea as we're looking and as we're tracking them. You see here, it's not, you know, exact thing, but that kind of gives you the idea. Things quiet here. I mean, the tropics are quiet. That's great news, obviously. You know, our logo, not an alert logo, that's actually a flag type logo, as of course tomorrow is that, you know, 24th anniversary of those terrible, terrible events there on 9/11, 2001. Just, you know, those attacks. It's absolutely tragic what happened that fateful day. You know, we remember here everything that happened, but as we go ahead and look at some more historical things, we're going to talk about the weather in terms of that history here. And we look back 61 years ago this morning. It was not calm here, relatively. I mean, we have the coastal flood advisory and some showers here and there, but it was, you know, a pattern here where we're relatively calm. Back then, 61 years ago at this time, we had Hurricane Dora over our area here. It was moving inland. It had been a couple hours since it had made landfall. It made landfall near St. Augustine. You know, that Category 2 storm. I know just one where it was so eventful, obviously. People will never forget it. The maximum sustained winds around 110 miles an hour. Only hurricane to make landfall along the northeast Florida coast. Northeast Florida's coast during the 20th century. We haven't had any since that date there, September 10th, 1964. I know we've had so many come at us from different directions, you know, some still being very impactful, obviously, but we have not had a hurricane here make landfall on the first coast since that day. We didn't have any others in the 1900s. We haven't had any here in the 21st century either. The 20th century, the only one door the 21st century, haven't had any. So, you know, cross our fingers here. But again, eventually we're going to have a pattern set up where we get one to curve back. And we had that in 1898 in early October as well, as we were looking there toward parts of southeast Georgia and northeast Florida as well. That terrible hurricane early October caused devastating storm surge. It was even stronger than this. It was even more powerful than this hurricane was. So, I mean, you did the math. That was 66 years apart. I mean, you know, we had Idalia and Helene back-to-back years. You just never know. It's not like, you know, the exact math's going to work out where 5 years from now we have one come across where it kind of makes that curve for the west, because that's hard to do in this pattern on the East Coast, really, especially that far north to kind of curve west like that. Because generally you're going to have them come more north. That's why, you know, especially lately we had them in the Gulf. They can do it around Miami, further west there with the overall pattern. We had that with Andrew, but they even haven't had that much. We had Gene and Francis make landfall down there and impact us in '04. But it's really hard for a storm to turn due west at that part there of the United States in terms of the latitude-longitude data. So very important. You know, very important to kind of keep in mind here with all of that. I mean, but Dora was one where we'll talk about how it's still that storm of record here for many of our counties here locally. One where, you know, that we talk about, you know, we're never going to forget. I wasn't there in '64. My mom was there, and you know, in Bradford County, Hampton area there in 1964, riding that one out. And she remembered that storm very well. She's never going to forget what happened there, obviously. Down there toward Hampton and Bradford County, you know, just that, you know, that fear everybody had there of the damage. I mean, some areas hit harder than others, but You get the idea there. She was writing that out of the Old Hampton Elementary School and that shelter there. Not the one that's closed down now, but the one before that. They are right in downtown Hampton, per se. And it's a situation that, so many folks were never going to forget. I know the legendary late WTXT Channel 4 chief meteorologist George Winterling was on the air for that one. He was the one to forecast this turn here toward our area. I mean, he was really on top of it because, just a little bit of a difference even can make, a huge difference in terms of impact. Little difference in geography, huge difference in terms of impact. I know some meteorologists had it hidden in different spots, but he thought it was going to make that beeline there toward the first coast, and it sure did here. And, it had big implications. I mean, the fatality numbers were not too high with it, thankfully, due in part to Georgia's warnings there on television, on WTXT Channel 4. I mean, that, don't have as much, in the way of maybe the percentage of viewership now with the internet, everything's kind of split apart, fragmented. But back then, I mean, everybody was tuning in. Channel 4, I think Channel 12 was around back then as well. But in that Jacksonville market, everybody had their eyes on George. He was telling everybody what was probably going to happen. He was getting people prepared because it hadn't happened any other time in the 1900s. It still hadn't happened here. And we don't have any, in the 2000s per se. It's something where people maybe weren't anticipating it. We're not expecting anything here. We can't go too far, but at least the next week we're not expecting anything like this in terms of intratropical development, which we got rid of the other wave. We were watching there very carefully. But you see, it came off the coast of Africa. As we get in October, it'll be less likely for stuff to come off the coast of Africa and track like this. But it did happen that early October period in 1898 as well. I don't have that track on here. But that storm kind of took that beeline. I was looking back at that last night because I was just kind of interested in seeing the timeline, I mean, because at a certain point they're going to have more of a tendency to come out of the Gulf. So, there's still a chance for at least a few more weeks that a storm theoretically could come at us from this direction. Technically, it's a little longer, but I'm talking about one that's actually a hurricane strength making that beeline. You're not just a weak tropical storm. So, climatologically and historically, we still have a few more weeks. So, just keep in mind here, and even then, we could still have other storms. We had Michael, Matthew, and Milton. They've all had different impacts on our area here, obviously, based on where you're at. But, this type of western turn is hard to have with the overall pattern. You maybe have that heat up toward the north there, that pressure pattern kind of allowing this to come on, and you have that high there, and then, this thing's set up just wrong for things to take that beeline because it's again very hard to have that. A lot of times, you'll have them even kind of curve back earlier on. I mean, that's what Dorian did, for instance. It was kind of like this in a way, but then it took that turn over Bahamas. It just sat over them and caused total devastation. It curved more north. It's hard to have a Florida landfall go from east to west here, especially in northern Florida. That's why it's only happened, that one time here, going back about 125 years or so. I mean, that one 1898 was very, very impactful. I think it might have been a technically just Camden landfall. I don't have, that information right off the top of my head, Camden County, Georgia. But the point is, since 1900, we've only had one of these, and that was Dora. That was 61 years ago at this time, coming across our area here from the east, and it had that big impact that hadn't been replicated in several of our counties. So just a historic storm, to say the least. Our last three here, Orange Stark, our last three that have been hurricanes that have traveled within 50 miles. You might think Helene or Irma, did make this list, but then there haven't been many as we're looking here. Idalia didn't make this list. You kind of get the idea because they were just out of this radius, Helene and Idalia. But Irma, it was barely within this radius here. And before that, we had that storm in 68 there. And then before that, it was Dora, obviously, in 64. And, just very historic. You can see Dora's path very well on here, coming from that east to west. It sticks out like a sore thumb, to be quite honest. That's not a normal path here as we're looking and as we're tracking things. And then I know because of where it hit, the 1898 one, I don't think that's in this radius because it went this north. You see one in 1896, so that was very impactful coming across toward areas like around Lake City. We had some big problems there. There's one in that time range as well, that caused big problems toward the north central Florida region as well. So you kind of get the idea. But let's go ahead and see here this graphic. Again, we don't have the 1898 one, but we have an 1896 and 1888 here. Besides Dora, the only three in recorded history as hurricanes to track within 50 miles of Stark as Cat 2 plus. Even if that one I referenced in 1898, I don't have that on here because it wasn't quite within that radius. It hit there just around Queensland, give or take, and it was very impactful though for areas on the coast with catastrophic threat. I mean, we're talking about 15 or so feet, give or take, as we look at as we track things. It was just absolutely awful. But as you're looking here, Dora there on that September 10, 1964, 61 years ago this morning, coming across from the east to the west, and before that for Stark, in terms of a Cat 2 plus within 50 miles. Irma was one where it was a weakening Cat 1 to tropical storm, in that radius, give or take, as you're looking, but it was not Cat 2 in the radius, that's for sure. And we have the unnamed storm in 1888, and then the unnamed 1896. Those may have been worse than Dora, quite honestly, based on what I've read. But, those they came out from the Gulf. This one here came out of the east, and it was bad for Stark and Jacksonville and St. Augustine. It kind of checked all those boxes in an unfortunate way, obviously. I mean, that eye went right, over parts of that Stark area, really, as you're looking at this. I don't know how well, because we don't have radar, history, obviously, radar really from back then, to be able to look. But just based on everything we're seeing here, you see how Stark, I mean, we were in that eye wall here in the word Stark at least, whatever was left of it here. As we were looking, it was still Cat 2 and then transitioned to Cat 1 about, as it got here towards Stark. I mean, it wasn't just within 50 miles of Stark. It was, within maybe 5 miles of the center, with the lowest pressure. So that kind of tells that weather story here for sure. Just a, historic storm here as we're just tracking things. I mean, you see radiuses on here too. That's that little dashed circle here. Those are important for like lightning delays, like what we had there at that game in Jacksonville on that Sunday. 8-mile radius, not as big of a circle as this, but it's in all directions here as you're looking. So it's a pretty big circle. And again, despite us having a Dalian Helene, I didn't update this graphic because I didn't have to, because I looked on the database there and those were not within the circle. So, one day we'll probably have to update this and it'll be very bad, in terms of, the impact being the worst it's probably been since Dora for Stark, or not at that point yet, and we're not seeing anything in the immediate future like that. So cross our fingers, that is good news. But as we go ahead and see the current names, Gabrielle, Umberto, Imelda, Jerry, Karen, Lorenzo, Melissa, Nestor. We haven't had that many storms this season, quite honestly, and that's great. I mean, it doesn't always, correlate. I mean, you had Andrew in 92, the first one in late August, but haven't had that many storms. Haven't really had too big of U.S. impacts. Great news. I would have suspected at some point we'll get an uptick somewhere. We've had some of that here in recent seasons. Later on in the year, doesn't mean they'll hit us, but if one of them does hit the U.S., it could be a problem. We don't know. But right now we're doing good. But we still got, some of the worst hurricanes have hit around October 10th. So we still got about a month to go, where there's a decent chance that somewhere in the U.S. could have a catastrophic scenario. But there's nothing imminent. There's nothing, the model's right off, and we very well could get lucky as well. So, again, let's go ahead and keep paying attention. You see the overall tropical climatology here. And again, as we get to about October 10th, things start dropping off pretty rapidly. A lot of these hurricanes, like Michael, for instance, came from the Central American gyre. And that's something we'll have to watch for, because late season stuff lately has been a problem when it's coming from something like that really triggers things and causes big problems. Again, Michael was just devastating. We're a month away from the 7-year anniversary of that out there toward areas around Panama City and our western counties. They were impacted too, as you see on this graphic. Just from a record there, in my assessment of things, since the names started being used there, and different names at that point, different lists, but 1950s when names started being used for tropical cyclones, and we actually had one N50 easy there be the storm of record per se for Levy since 1950, and really maybe go back to the 1800s when you had those couple. Those were worse. 1898, 1888, I believe, 1896, 1888. We had a lot of them there in the 1800s that were very significant. Late 1800s. Some of the records don't go further back, but, like 1851 maybe, something like that. But since 1950, you see the storm of record here. There's been more data, the names from that point. Easy for Levy County, but Michael, encompassed 10 counties. You see Kate there. I know that's a storm, that people nationally forget about. Kate and Alberto, I believe, are the two on here that have not been retired. We're still using those names every 6 years. They probably both should have been retired, quite honestly. It's the way things work sometimes, when the areas here that maybe don't get as much TV coverage, they get impacted. They don't get as big of national attention. Alberto for sure should have been retired. That was a very deadly event. Even just north of our area, we had problems around Americus, for instance. There was no excuse for that name to not be retired, to be quite honest. We had and I hate to do this off the top of my head, but around 30 or so fatalities there, from Alberto. It was a very bad flash flooding event. It was, a predecessor to Allison in 01 for Houston area that did get retired. So, as we're tracking things for sure. So, you kind of get the idea, but of course, Dora is the reason why I'm really emphasizing this graphic now. 10 of our counties, still the storm of record here. Still the storm of record for about 10 of our counties here. Even though it hit 61 years ago in that frame from 1950 until now, that's the worst storm. And, in some of these counties by a long shot, and some kind of close between Armadora maybe, give or take. I mean, I would say Moralacha was one where I could very much consider Dora. It was very close, Dora was very bad. There was a Cat 2, a high-end Cat 2. There's still, even though you remember Dora say, well, if you're thinking, well, maybe that's the worst it could be, no, it's not by a long shot either. You could have a storm like Michael. It'd be hard to have, or a storm like Andrew with that type of power, come at us from the east. It's not impossible. But I think it would probably be a little bit harder to get like a Cat 5 or high-end Cat 4 to come at us from the east, but easily could have a low-end Cat 4 eventually here in a timeline that, come at us from the east and be catastrophic. I mean, I keep referencing it, and I do have a really old graphic for it. I may go ahead and try to put this in here. It may take me a minute, quite honestly, but the 1898 hurricane is one, that it's just a reminder. Even in early October, we can have problems as well. I think that was a Cat 4 that hit there in early October, coming at us from the, east southeast per se in our Georgia counties, and the first coast region just devastated, and that was, it was not, named then, but I mean, if we went back, let's say, to 1898, we'd have a lot of counties with that storm on here. I mean, of the storm of record. Not Dora wouldn't be the storm of record for Camden if it went back to 1898, but we don't have anybody around, obviously, from then, so don't want to go so far where people don't remember. This kind of gives you an idea of, if you hear stories, this helps to relate to the viewer better. It's the first year we had the names, but you see Dora is still on here, still the storm of record 61 years ago, and tomorrow is the 8-year anniversary of Hurricane Irma moving across our area. Today's the anniversary of the landfalls downstate, but tomorrow is the anniversary of the Irma impacts here locally, that September 11th there, 2017. So, even though obviously, by far September 11th is remembered for what happened there, in the mid-Atlantic Northeast there, in 2001, the absolute, awful scenarios that transpired there with those attacks. Down here, Irma is also still a big storyline. We didn't have power. That's the only storm that we, here in Bradford. I've been here since 2000, and that's the only storm I lost power from for more than like 4 hours. Irma, we lost power here in Bradford, even though it wasn't the storm of record for Bradford. It still had a big impact compared, to any of the others in the last 25 years, 26 years or so. Irma's the only storm we lost power from for more than 4 hours. We lost it for, let's do the math here, it was 2 or 3 in the morning, give or take. You know, as I'm trying to remember that, you know, on that 11th, and it came back around 9 a.m. on the 12th. So about 30 hours without a power here in Bradford from Irma. Otherwise, it was 4 and 3 hours during that 04 season, Frances and Jean. Otherwise, really not losing it for much at all. Any of the other storms, Helene, flickering there a good bit, but you know, as you saw during some of our coverage there, our backup systems having to switch to some things, but it didn't really stay out at all. It's just a few seconds, it would go out, knock things off, and mess up our backup systems. You know, I mean, that one, you know, of course, Columbia, Swanee, Taylor, much, much worse. You know, I mean, if you lost power in some of these storms in Bradford that weren't Irma and Dora, you know, or the 04 ones, Frances and Jean, you know, going back here the last couple of decades, you know, then you know, you might have just had something happen locally, or again, it might, you know, just show that, you know, you were one of the more unlucky ones, unfortunately. But Irma, you know, and then, of course, Frances and Jean were probably the three most prolific power outage producing hurricanes for Bradford in the last 25 years or so. I know Matthew had some outages. We had some outages as we're looking through some of these different storms, you know, Nicole and going through, I'm just doing these here, you know, of course, the storm downstate there, Ian, we had some outages from that, sure, in the area, but, you know, Bradford, but, you know, the one, you know, storm where Irma was the worst, and Frances and Jean kind of trail behind generally, so just kind of looking here, and as we're tracking things, we're going to go ahead and move through here some more as we're looking and as we're kind of just tracking things here. You know, just important. I know it's not the current weather, but there's not, you know, a whole bunch going on. We had that flat flooding potential. We had some areas get a good bit of rain on that Monday night. We had some more in Flagler, even last 12 hours. I mean, you know, nothing tropical about this, but let's go ahead and talk about this here real quick. You can see some areas 3+ inches in Flagler there. As we get into some of these brighter reds, this last 12 hours, you know, darker reds, 2.5 inches, give or take. But I mean, it's pretty confined, not getting too much around Bradford, maybe some sprinkles and the like. But you know, if you're watching Tallahassee, you're kind of wondering what I'm talking about, asking what I'm talking about, because it's been really confined, and that's kind of pushing further south, and our rain chances are going to get lower and lower here. You know, in the general theme here, as we're monitoring things, as we're giving you guys the very latest, obviously. So again, just trying to give you guys all the updates here. Just trying to give you guys all the updates on the scenario. We'll get more of that full forecast here in just a moment, obviously, as we're looking and as we're tracking things. It's, you know, just there's a lot to talk about, obviously, in terms of the weather history more than anything tonight. So I know this is going to be a different looking graphic if I can get to it on our system here. The 1898 situation. Just want to show this to everybody at home. It does tell a story. It's going to take me a minute to find it, though. Having to kind of go through some old files here, but I think it's important to see you guys if you're at home when I'm talking about that one, because that means you just can't let your guard down, obviously. You just can't let your guard down. So, very important to keep in mind. It's important to do things on the fly sometimes, too, because, you know, when we kind of lead the conversation one way or the other, you know, it can be kind of helpful here to let people know, you know, more in detail what we're talking about, to be quite honest. Because things definitely, you know, have that different type of, you know, turn sometimes here, even in meteorology, that we just got to be aware of. So, you know, this is a graphic I did really before. I think we were doing the formal updates we put on our website, but let me just, back in 2019, I made this graphic, so it's going to look a little different because it's not the same format that we were using back then, but I just wanted to kind of show this to you guys at home a little bit here. It's going to take me just a second. I got to get the correct ratio on here, you know, best I can anyway, and the like, but just important to kind of put this stuff in here because I had it on a website, but haven't put in the show here, at least, a while. If I've used it, it's been a while. I think I did use it at one point, but I've changed some different things up in the show here since then. It's been a while. So we're just kind of doing this on the fly a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and show this to you now. So this is that 1898 Hurricane I keep referencing. Because you see that angle? No, the other one was a little more due west. This had that really, kind of steeper, kind of west-northwest type look at things. Because a lot of times you have that due north turn. But the 1898 Hurricane, it went right in there towards southeast Georgia. But had big problems even, right there in our far extreme northeast Florida county of Nassau there. That's 1898. They called it the Georgia Hurricane. I mean, before Michael, Roy, parts of Georgia hadn't any. It's a different part per se, but Roy hadn't seen anything like that. Of course, Helene last year kind of changed some different things as well. But again, this is an 1898 Georgia Hurricane. Definitely, one. This was in early October now. I know it didn't show on the graphic, but so it's still possible we could have a bad situation like that, even from that direction for a few more weeks of the pattern. Not impossible, so just stay weather aware, have the hurricane kit up to date, but we're not seeing anything of immediate concern. So that is the good news here. We have some tropical downpours and the like, but that we've had some of that flooding concern in some of the coastal areas. Coastal flood advisory still in place, so be aware of that. Those high tides and the like there too, can be little points there where things are a little bit more enhanced. So just important to kind of keep in mind. But here's that rainfall forecast now. You see it's starting to relent, going further down to our central South Florida, southeast Florida. They need to rain, but they don't want too much too quick either. I know in Central Florida we had that flash flood warning. We had one for Orange County on that Tuesday. Could have some in southeast Florida, but they have had some drought concerns too. But so they could use it some. But I know clutter.com/Radar Interactive. Look at things available there. But weather overall for like football games, fairly nice for the local area. But it's mainly going to be regarding high school because FSU's in a bye week this week. In Jacksonville, they're up at Cincinnati. And then the Gators there, they're going to be going over to Baton Rouge. Not the weather might be bad there. I haven't had a chance to look, out of the area for the two. But like high school games, like Bradford's going up to Mandarin. They're in Jacksonville for a 6:30 kickoff Friday night in Duval County. Well, they should be pretty good there. I mean, a little further east, so in theory, you could have some passing showers further east. But, a lot of the area, though, like Tallahassee High School football, Albany High School football, Lake City area, give or take, Waycross, Brunswick, very little rain chances, and we're going to start to lose some of that humidity here, which is what we like to see, obviously. So that's some good news. Not a lot of it, but some. I mean, don't get your hopes up completely, but at night it's going to feel fairly nice based on these lows I'll see here in a second. A little more about football, though. We said you a sneak of this here on our Jaguar Lightning delay covered on Sunday. But Ohio State #1 in my current playoff, rankings here. I have the top 3 as Big Ten, which not many people are going to do. And, obviously with Big Ten games and the title game, probably wouldn't stay like this. But right now, those have been the 3 most impressive teams, I'd say. I mean, Penn State, honestly, I had them at 1 before. Ohio State, I know it was a game you're supposed to win, but they had a better margin by a good bit. Penn State struggled a little, even though they won by a lot in theirs. I had to drop them some. Oregon really jumped up. I mean, they beat Oklahoma State, a team who, I know they've struggled lately, but a Big 12 team, they just absolutely, beat them by numerous touchdowns like they were an FCS opponent or something, which you don't really expect to see. So I think they have a lot of ability there. Still early in the year, Miami at 4, they beat Notre Dame. They beat Bethune-Cookman this past weekend. They're going to have a game this weekend against USF, who, what a game that's going to be on the CW Saturday afternoon. It's on your CW affiliates. They're 18, I think, USF in the main AP poll there, but, Miami, I think, is 5 in that. It's a huge game. Georgia's going to play Tennessee, which is a big game as well. I know I don't have Tennessee quite in my first teams out here, but they're, right on the edge, and we'll just be kind of watching, obviously, and tracking here. And there's a few SEC teams that are just out of my first 4 out, per se, that I'll be monitoring. Like Oklahoma's just out, for instance, as well as the first 4 out. Clemson, Georgia Tech play this week, so You know, now if that's a close one, it's one thing, but if one team loses by a wide margin, somebody else will probably get bumped in here, and depends on their performance as well. Anyway, again, FSU's off this week. They had that big game against Alabama, that an easy game per se against the FCS opponent there from East Texas A&M. Over there, I believe that's what they're called, East Texas A&M. I almost wanted to, let me double check. That's how easy of a game it was. I can't even remember the opponent there. You know, a few days out. Yeah, East Texas A&M. I almost wanted to add like another school name into that. Oh, it is Commerce. Okay, I was going to say Commerce, and East Texas University A&M in Commerce, apparently. So, okay, I was on the right track, I guess. But anyway, that's what I'm seeing here. It is in Commerce, Texas. But anywho, so it was an easy opponent. It wasn't Texas A&M or like Notre Dame's playing this week or something like that. But again, TCU there, they're a team that I really have higher than everybody else. I know they didn't play, I don't think, last week. Or if they did, it was an easy game because they had that Monday night game with North Carolina. North Carolina did play after that and won, but you know, TCU had that, you know, extra time there to be off. They, you know, that's how a lot of teams will want to do it. They're not going to be able to play an easy team right after us for a week. Yeah, they didn't play after that one game, so they're only just 1-0 per se. And the overall standings are another team in their conference, like Kansas, is 2-1. Kansas State's 1-2. So kind of odd to have one team just playing one game, and two of them haven't played three already. But you know, and as you're tracking, actually, I said it's just two. I think Iowa State would also be up there as we're monitoring things. They played three, so they started out that week 0 as well. So Iowa State was, you know, really impressive in some different games here. Granted, you know, you could make an argument to almost drop them a little bit, but they have 2 wins over, you know, decent teams, Iowa and Kansas State, though it's looking like those teams aren't quite as good now. So depending on how that kind of holds out here, you know, there's a chance Iowa State might drop some. I have them a little higher than everybody else. I feel like the Big 12 needs to get credit here, and Utah's going to be a team everybody's going to be watching as well, as we're tracking things. So, you know, we'll just be watching Arch Manning for Texas, of course, as well. I mean, they really, really struggled up at Ohio State against a brand new quarterback for them. I mean, he's pretty new as well, Arch Manning, but you would not expect it to be that. You know, they were set out for most of that game. So, by Notre Dame, their brand new quarterback there, CJ Carr, he really was impressive when they lost. They were on the road there. They did a lot. And they had been a team that was made the national title game before. You know, coach that really, I mean, you know, done a great job in Marcus Freeman. I mean, Texas's coach has had some trouble in some bigger games here overall. So, you know, some trying to justify some of these here, obviously. LSU had dropped her quite a bit because, I mean, that Clemson win, after Clemson was down 16-0 to Troy, they won, but dropped them some too. LSU, that win kind of got devalued, and it wasn't like they took care of business as well against Louisiana Tech. They, you know, won by not as big of a margin you would anticipate. I mean, I know they're not exactly the same, but Alabama won by a huge margin against UL Monroe, while Louisiana Tech and a neighboring town, Ruston, there, that was a fairly close game. I mean, I think it was like 23-7, something like that, is what LSU won by. It was not that impressive of a margin by any means. That's what it was. So we'll see. I know Haynes King beat key to Georgia Tech. Again, Clemson is Cade Klubnik there, the 2-time ACC champion quarterback, but struggled a little lately. That game's on ESPN, I believe, at noon Saturday. And, you know, that could be a huge game in this ACC. Maybe, you know, for ACC hopes here, it'd be hard to get more than this. It would be nice to get 3 teams out of the conference in the playoff this year. We got 2 last year. You know, FSU, ACC, that's why I kind of say we, but you get the idea. You know, I have 2 in here right now. SMU and Clemson got in last year. They were pretty low down, though. You know, just at the bottom. Miami would get a bye. FSU would have to go on the road, but that Miami FSU game could be, you know, one of the bigger FSU games in recent memory here in early October if both teams stay undefeated going into that. Granted, those games in 2023 you would have thought would have been important. But as we say every time on here, pretty much everything for the whole season, basically, sadly, was discredited. I mean, the Noles went 13-0. They were told by the playoff committee that they weren't allowed. They weren't allowed to be in the playoff. You know, they lost the Orange Bowl, but by then everybody was pretty much, you know, that was going to move on to the NFL. You know, as they had so much NFL talent on their defense, especially. you know, they weren't going to play in a game that wasn't going to mean anything. I mean, it's a weird thing. Years ago, you know, in the 1800s. We're talking about 1800 of tropics, but in like the 1980s and 1990s, even maybe 2000s, like Auburn in '04, you know, they played in Auburn. They had a perfect season in '04. The AP didn't move them up to AP number one. They didn't, you know, they got a perfect season. I guess it's 14-0, but you know, USC Oklahoma played for that title instead. And you got to keep in mind, you know, some of these polls earlier in the year can kind of set where the playoff committee might think a team needs to go based on who they beat later in the year. So that poll voting is very important. I don't get a vote, obviously, but there's a lot of members of the media that get a vote, and they got to take that seriously because that can have a big, you know, role here in how things are later in the year because of it's you know it sets up a lot of things because it makes the game bigger. Then all of a sudden, you know, a team can get a boost, and you know, and then they see, well, they had 3 ranked wins. They only had 1, but 2 of the teams shouldn't have been ranked. You know, you can kind of, you know, that's why that, you know, voting in those polls, coaches poll, AP poll, you know, very important. You got to take their responsibility seriously. So, I mean, I bring that up because there's been a controversy about that lately. It's just, you know, I mean, I don't have, you know, this isn't, you know, a specific thing in terms of like, you know, just one person's voting. I mean, you know, they're available. EP votes are of all the voters. You know, some of them, you know, doing a great job. Be a little different than this. I don't think anybody has it probably exactly like this. You know, USF last week had them 12, but they weren't really 12. It's just the way this worked. But they're actually really 11 in my rankings here now because of that huge win in Gainesville. I think the Gators might be, and they might not show up because things might just fall apart. But I think they're a little bit better actually than we're giving them credit for because I think USF is way better than people are giving them credit for. But the Miami game could determine a lot with that. So we shall see. And USF could still get in the playoff even if they lose to Miami. You know, and if they win their conference, they might be the highest ranked champ in the group there. You know, out of the non-power 4. But you get the idea here. It's just important to kind of take things seriously when you're voting here. I mean, you know, some of those rankings are great. Some of them, you know, there's not. I mean, you can't be putting teams ahead of other teams that, you know, lost to the other team, and it's not like there's been a whole season played. I mean, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. So, anyway, let's go ahead and go to that planning forecast here. North Florida and South Georgia. You can see 40% chance of rain here on this Wednesday, 30% on your Thursday, 30% on your Friday. It's pretty even. A lot of the guidance actually going a little less, but there's some, you know, little spin. Not saying it'll be tropical or anything, but this area here of moisture, you know, might spin up, you know, and then it's a pesky low type situation here. That the models, I didn't want to just take the rain chances completely away in case one model like the DFS was showing. It's kind of leaving it hanging around. And we do these updates pretty late at night here in this way, and that we can see some of the latest data. I mean, it's after, like, you know, there's 11 o'clock shows on TV, and so we can see like the GFS here run and be able to, you know, look at that. I haven't looked at the Euro since we're on, but, you know, and it says a little bit of a spin. So I didn't want to lower the rain chances, you know, just all the way down. Like, I mean, you know, I understand it very well could be that scenario that plays out where we only have like 10%. And we're even a little cooler, a little drier, but it's just, there's, you know, there's a chance that we could end up having to go up on some of these for a few of these days. So kind of hedge in there a little bit. But you see 65 Monday morning, that looks really nice because some rural areas here could be in the lower 60s even, not out of the question. Even some of these mornings where I have 67, 68, some rural areas could be like 65, 64. So keep that in mind. My other coastal areas could be closer to 70-ish, but you get the idea as we're looking, you know, these temperatures close to average. I mean, you know, some mornings a little below, some of these highs slightly above, but most of it's pretty close to average. So that's about what we expect here. You know, we don't have a tropical system. Sometimes that brings down the average. As I remember in Irma in 17, Tallahassee had a very cool afternoon in the wake of Irma, a pretty low high temperature because of all the cloud cover on the back side of things. You know, so you know, I think it was in the 70s maybe for the high that day. And then we had. It was Ian here later, you know, on in September there, the anniversary will be coming up. It was a storm that we had, you know, some very cool air back, you know, behind, you know, for those daytime temperature because of all that cloud cover here. on the backside. So, the averages are already a little lower, and we're around that. So in some ways you could say we're a little below average in some ways of thinking, because I'm a little higher than some of the guidance here, for instance, on some of these highs. So there's a chance we could end up being a degree or two cooler, but it's a little bit uncertain. This is a tricky pattern sometimes because these nor'easters, this is a harder time to forecast than others, believe it or not. Now, if you had a bad hurricane, sometimes it's actually more obvious to forecast. But I know this is a little bit of a deviation from what you might see elsewhere, because there's just some guidance that's trying to keep throwing some rain chances in, and then might not get quite as much of that core area in, and if you get enough sunshine during the day, it can warm you up a degree or two higher. So just want to be kind of mindful of all that. So again, just very important here as we're looking and as you're tracking things. Just kind of give you guys an idea of that overall meteorological scenario. So I think we pretty much covered everything we need to here tonight. Let me see if there's any questions or comments here from any of the viewers at home. Just kind of looking at all of that here real quick in the Weather Center. It is late, but anybody that's watching might have a question or comment. It's important to kind of keep that in mind, but don't really see anything right now. But I just appreciate you guys tuning in here and trusting me. We do have that coastal flood advisory, though, as we're looking there towards some of those eastern zones. Obviously, coastal Nassau, coastal Duval, coastal Flagler, northeast coastal St. Johns, southeast coastal St. Johns, coastal Glen, and coastal Camden. We're looking at things there. We're tracking things. Southeast Georgia, northeast Florida beaches, to 2 a.m. Thursday, high rip currents a risk as well. Toward areas around the St. Johns River, we could have a little bit of flooding there too, because of the way things are there with the overall pattern. Minor coastal flooding around times of high tide, a possibility, as we are giving you guys the very latest, obviously. So, just important to kind of be mindful of all that here, as we're giving you guys all those important updates here on the overall meteorological situation. But I think that'll do it. Have a great night. Stay safe. We'll be back here, in the days to come, late Thursday, with another formal update, unless we need to pop back in earlier for some reason again. Just stay safe out there, as we're giving you guys all those important updates, obviously, here on anything, if there's any type of situation. We're making sure we're keeping you guys informed. We're making sure we're keeping you guys updated on all the different details. There's Jacksonville Jaguars, that great win. See if, that was against Carolina. See if they can go up to Cincinnati and get that done as well. And that'd be nice, as we're looking here. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it on up. Again, just have a great night, everybody. Stay safe.